Morning, everyone. We're going to wait just a few minutes while people sort of filter into the virtual room. Good morning. All right. Well, welcome everybody to the TPA membership meeting for February. We're super excited to have you join us this morning. We have a pretty packed agenda, and we're excited to sort of walk through all of the changes and news that we've been working through with the system. So just a couple quick housekeeping notes. We are recording today's session, so for any reason you get bounced off or you have to leave the meeting, please send a message to information@provideralliance.org. We'll make sure we can get you the recording as soon as possible. For anybody who's registered for the meeting, we'll also follow up with the materials from the session today. Throughout the course of the session, we will post some documents and materials in the chat feature. So keep an eye out for that. But if you missed that for some reason, don't worry, we'll follow up with an email. And lastly, as we go through the session today, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we will respond to questions as they come up. So with that, I will turn it over to Patrick to get everybody welcomed, and then we'll take it from there.
Well, thank you, Craig, and welcome everybody. Glad to have you here today. We do have a lot of information to go over, as Craig has already noted. So with that, we welcome any questions and comments throughout the session. Please feel free to post into the Q&A and raise your hand if you'd like to speak a question or comment to the group or anybody that you're going to be hearing from today. So with that, Craig, I think I'll just throw it back to you and we'll get started and we can talk a little bit about the upcoming meetings.
Okay, great. So we are planning out our sessions for the rest of the year, and we're excited to let you know that on March 31st, as we are hopefully on the tails of a budget discussion, Rick Smith will be joining us to talk about the ODP budget for the year. On April 21st, we'll be looking at some opportunities and innovations as it relates to system sustainability. What we learned from our survey was that people are really interested, our members are really interested in connecting with industry leaders. So we're really excited about trying to put together a really good panel of speakers to connect with the members and talk a little bit about where we're going with IDA services into the future. We're also happy to report that we have a great collaboration developing with Representative Dan Miller and the 2023 Disability and Mental Health Summit. We're really hoping to use that time to host a TPA meeting, in addition to working with Representative Miller and Louise Larkin from Representative Miller's office. Louise has been gracious enough to join us this morning, so I'll turn it over to her to talk a little bit about this event.
Thanks, Craig, and thank you all for having me here this morning. Representative Miller would have loved to have been here. He is at the moment on the floor of the House. So I'm here in his stead. I think he will be hoping that there will be an opportunity to join you at a meeting coming up soon. So the Disability and Mental Health Summit, some of you are familiar with, this will be our 10th summit. And this year, what we did in terms of format was shift things a little bit. We decided that it made sense to capitalize on our strengths as an office. And one of our strengths is the ability to bring in legislators and to talk policy and legislative solutions. So we are doing a one-day summit this year on May 11th, and we will be hosting 2 policy hearings. One in the morning that's focused on mental health, and one in the afternoon focused on disability issues. The partnership with TPA, which came about, through a number of discussions with Patrick, he brought us the idea of maybe having a TPA membership meeting, and we were really excited about that. The space is there to do that. And then we came back and said, look, we have a a policy hearing in the morning with a bunch of legislators. We have a policy hearing in the afternoon, but we've got time in the middle. And so what we're very excited about is that TPA will be hosting a luncheon for legislators in between the morning policy hearing and the afternoon policy hearing. And it will be an opportunity for all of you to have whatever legislators are in the room sort of there for you with no distractions, which I think is something that will be beneficial to both them and to all of you. In the afternoon, I know you'll be having your membership meeting in the morning. In the afternoon, we will be doing that disability policy hearing. It will be prefaced by an hour-long discussion with a special guest, as yet to be confirmed, but we're working on someone fairly high up at DHS from Harrisburg who will hopefully be able to join us. And she and Representative Miller will talk about some of the general issues facing folks with disabilities and the role of DHS in meeting some of those needs in Pennsylvania. They'll have some time for Q&A, and then we'll move to the policy hearing itself. The one topic, we usually do 2 or 3 topics in a 2-hour policy hearing. The one that we will definitely be doing is talking about disability employment. Particularly, we'll be hearing from some members of the Employment First Oversight Commission about some of the challenges that they see in Pennsylvania and some possible ways to address them. And then there will be at least 1 or 2 more disability related topics that will be included in that policy hearing. And again, we're still in the process of developing all of that content. So that's kind of the day. We will have a resource fair that'll be going on from 11 to 1. We always include a resource fair that tends to be very popular with members of the public who attend. And some of your organizations regularly are table at our resource fair. So that is another opportunity that's out there, particularly if you're in this local area here in Southwestern Pennsylvania, and you're interested in potentially being part of the resource fair, please feel free to reach out to me. Patrick has all my contact information, and we'd love to see you there. So I hope that gives you an idea of how excited we are about the partnership and kind of what the day will look like. And I'm looking forward to meeting many of you in person that day.
Louise, I want to thank you as well and really echo the excitement, my own excitement in that on behalf of TPA, to really be able to collaborate. It just feels like such a great match. We look forward to being there. So we encourage all of our members, we have shared the date, May 11th, so we know we're going to be there. It's an all-day event, 9 to 4. We have a big segment that's going to be dedicated to TPA activities and meeting, and typically our legislative forum, but right there on site with Representative Miller, the number of legislators that he always does a great job collecting people, especially for these legislative panel discussions. Was gracious enough last year to let us address the DSP workforce issues. So we have a long history of working with Rep Miller. Really appreciate his support. It's been great working with you, Louise, and Cheryl, and everybody on your team, and the broader planning committee has been actively working too. So we'll keep members informed and apprised of everything as it comes together. And so glad, Louise, you were able to join us today. Give Representative Miller our best. We'll be in touch with him soon, and we hope he can join us sometime here between now and May as well. We look forward to seeing him then.
Thanks so much, Patrick. You all have a great day. Have a great meeting. We'll see you in May.
You too, Louise. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And Craig, I'll turn it back to you. Let you kind of finish out what we're looking at with some further upcoming meetings.
Okay. So just a couple of other notes for everybody. We do plan on hosting a summer and a fall in-person conference. And right now we're looking at July 28th being our ODP policy conference. Many of you remember we did that last year. It was sort of an inaugural event that brought a number of people from the Office of Developmental Programs to Cranberry at the Regional Learning Alliance, and we were able to have some breakout sessions and a great day to just sort of talk through some issues and at the policy level. So look forward to that this summer. And then in October, in partnership with the Center for Healthcare Solutions, we hope to participate in their annual showcase at the Pittsburgh Convention Center downtown. This will be an opportunity to really bring a lot of different healthcare partners together in the space and to talk about important issues around integration, health, wellness, and all of those types of things. Couple of other notes. So we are kind of rethinking how we're doing committees, also known as work groups. We're sort of debating how we, what we call these, but on March 9th, we just want to remind everybody that the ODP Tech Task Force Strategic Partnerships and Funding Work Group will be meeting from 3:30 to 4:30. The focus of that group is part of looking at how we develop partnerships across the state and sort of remove barriers as it relates to technology and supports and services. So encourage anybody who's interested in joining that. That will be available on our calendar. On March 16th, we'll be hosting a Human Resources Committee. These committees will look and feel a lot like the work that we've been doing with our Government and Advocacy Committee over the last year. We hope that to be much more member-driven in terms of topics and interest levels, things that we need to cover, rather than us just sort of providing information to you. Though that will be a part of it, we really want to make sure that we're engaging people differently. On March 23rd, we'll be having a Financial Management Committee, and then every Monday, again, we encourage anybody who's interested to join our Government and Advocacy Committee. We meet from 9:30 to 10:30. Again, just to note, these are going to be kickoff meetings. So we are kind of learning as we go with this. It'll be all about continuous improvement and engaging people in different ways. So we're open to anybody's thoughts or ideas about how to make it most effective. And I think with that, Patrick, I can turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Craig. So I'll just give a closing thought on the previous slide, really, as we sort of have already described. The kickoffs, really, we want anybody who's interested in being part of an ongoing discussion in these topics. So I don't think there'll be surprises in terms of these committee meetings that we're establishing. At last month's meeting, we took a poll of the interest level in sort of doing this type of thing. We had about 80% of our members present last month indicate that they would be supportive of doing this. So the first meetings that we're scheduling are the Human Resources and Financial Management Committee. The Government Advocacy meeting in the committee, it's really it meets frequently, but one of the things that we want to find out from members who want to engage in this way is just what's a good date for you? How frequently do you want to meet? What topics do you want to discuss? And as we've seen happen with Government Advocacy Committee, it's a really committed group of people. It's a growing group of people. We welcome that. We'll hear some things today that relate directly to some of the advocacy work and some of the things that that committee does on a routine basis. So we want to leave it up to you. We want it to be very meaningful and engaging for you. So we encourage everybody. We will announce those meetings closer to the dates when they are scheduled. They'll be on our calendar. We'll make sure we promote them. There will be meeting formats, so you'll have an open opportunity to talk with one another. They will be remote meetings, so we'll set everything up virtually through Zoom. But we want to encourage everybody to attend, participate. We're not interested in how many people, how few people, whoever wants to get together. We just want to create a forum to start that process and start to make sure that we're giving you an opportunity to engage in that way. So thank you, Craig, for covering all the meetings and information up until now. We may revisit a few things here as we go through the rest of the session. And going into the next couple of slides, I'll make note of a departure from the agenda. We moved up a few things, so really the items that we're intending to cover from the agenda on item number 4, we're going to kind of move up and talk about a few things that are recent, give you a little bit of recent history in terms of where we are in terms of advocacy. And the first slide that we wanted to go over is just reviewing the fact that we did a wage study, really an IDA workforce study last year. It was published actually in January. So on January 3rd, those who participated, 52 organizations, I believe, actively participated. This was a collaboration that we did through the Center for Healthcare Solutions that involved the Provider Alliance, the ARC of Pennsylvania, and RCPA. So I know many of you are very familiar with this data and report. This isn't the entire amount of information that we provided, but these are the headlines in terms of VSP average pay. And we also were able to extract from this frontline supervisory wages for both residential and other program supervisors. So you can see the data there. This is not brand new, but it is very recent data that we will be using and have used so far and will continue to use, I'm sure, in our advocacy going forward. So on the next slide is really just our reminder to everybody that we were able to successfully come together among all of the Pennsylvania provider associations and author a letter to Governor Shapiro very shortly after his inauguration, coming together in a $430 million budget request. So this is what we often refer to as the unified budget request. I think we're all very pleased among the associations, and hopefully we hear this resonate among members that this is a very good development, that we're very consistent in our messaging. This letter goes on to really describe from various perspectives the impact of the DSP workforce shortage and how that is affecting services and families and affecting lives for all of the nearly 60,000 people who are participants in the program, and of course their family members and the DSPs who support them in the entire community of intellectual disability services. So again, we want to emphasize that we're very pleased with this development. From this letter, we do have a meeting set up with Lindsay Malden, who is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Governor Shapiro on March the 6th. So we will all be getting together with the Deputy Chief of Staff to really highlight, answer any questions, talk as a group in terms of the importance of this, and of course, continue our advocacy that will remain rooted in this letter and the information contained in it. So on the next slide, we also just wanted to give a brief review in terms of where does this number come from. So this is a little bit of a review. If you were with us last month, we did talk about this in terms of how did we come up with $430 million? So to be clear, $430 million is the state portion. We are asking the Pennsylvania governor and legislature to approve $430 million state dollars. By doing so, that will draw down federal matching dollars that can be contributed to the IDA system. So the total amount of funding that would go into fee schedule rates through this request would be $900 million. And you can see how we arrived at that figure is really exclusively through inflation. One of the things that we know is that historically, ODP has used data from the federal government in terms of wage rates. We also know that there is not really a direct support professional wage rate. So they use a combination of federal codes, employment codes. And that data that they use is old. It's historical data that dated back to May of 2020. We know from research, right to know request, any number of activities, that the trending that ODP did through its consultant, Mercer Human Services Consulting, was they trended the May 2020 data forward by 3.5%. That's what you see in the appropriation basis column in this calculation. We know that actual inflation by the Consumer Price Index urban area, CPIU, was 8.74% over that same period. And we also know that the state put no inflation factor into the rates thereafter. So they used 3.5% to catch up the rates. And going forward, since the implementation of the fee schedule, there is no inflation embedded or included in the rates whatsoever. So we know now from published data, actual inflation, that inflation actually went up over 15% over that same period. So we have a real historical delta. If you look at just the most recently concluded 2022 year, annual inflation was 6.5%. So we've really just used what we also consider to be a discounted basis for the cost basis. If you look at the budget is well north of $5 billion for intellectual disability community services. We've done some discounting based on actual claims. It's a little hard to calculate in an environment that is sort of still recovering, of course, from COVID-19 and services that have not returned. But these are the calculations that are, again, exclusively based on inflation. And what you really see in the footnotes is where some of this data is coming from, how we've done the calculations. And looking forward, we didn't project another 6.5%. We looked rather modestly, looking at a few different data sources that range from 2.2 to 2.85%, looking at inflation for the next couple of years. And that's what we projected into the calculation. So it's not a compounding. It's not saying to the state, raise the rates every year. It's saying the state has an obligation to do these rates no more often than once every 3 years. And if rates are going to remain in effect for 3 years, they need to reflect inflation to actually be market-based rates going forward that can be competitive for us to attract and retain a quality workforce. So with that, I think we can go on to the next slide. So some recent developments. 2 days ago, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette published an editorial, an opportunity to stabilize PA's disability care system. So we were very grateful to see the Pennsylvania media through the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's editorial board weigh in. If you recall that the day after the election, the Post-Gazette editorial board wrote an editorial about the Shapiro era, of course, long before he was actually inaugurated as governor. And one of the four main priorities that the PG identified for the new administration was to fix the intellectual disability community system. So we were grateful back on November 9th. Equally so, now that we are in the middle of a campaign, have a unified budget request, we're meeting with officials in the administration, and very soon we'll be meeting with representatives from the General Assembly. So a very strong editorial working with Governor Shapiro's office. We have heard from the editorial board that they feel they've developed a good rapport so far. They seem to be responsive. They're hopeful that they can gain some traction on this issue. And of course, we're grateful that they remain very committed to it. So with that, I also want to recognize and acknowledge that Matt Mittelmeyer is the person who is in this photo with his direct support professional from Emmaus community of Pittsburgh. And I had only learned since the publication of this that Matt passed away on December 28th. So very sad for him, his family members, all his friends, and the people at Emmaus who worked with him. I know from everything I understand, Matt had a wonderful life. He was very integrated with his friends. He really lived his life in his community. And we're grateful that we can continue to pay tribute to Matt and his life and carry on this work. So we take it as him being honored through this. So we certainly welcome anybody that knew Matt. And I think, Karen, I see your hand raised. Craig, if you wouldn't mind opening Karen's mic so she can say a few words.
Karen, you should be good to speak. Karen.
We'll give you a moment, Karen, if you still want to say something to us. But I know I've heard wonderful things about the care Emmaus provided, and Karen and I had a chance to speak a little bit this morning. You know, once I had learned, you know, not just that Matt had been lost over the holidays, but just how well cared for he was. So again, Karen, feel free to make comment anytime you would like. You know, we thank you and everyone at Emmaus and everyone that was able to support Matt in his life, and we're thankful now again that we can hopefully move forward and honor his legacy and continue this work going forward. But we encourage you to take a read of the editorial. Craig, if you can post the link or post the editorial in the chat for folks to take a read of that. I know we have distributed it. So that is where we are in terms of the editorial. We were already planning to really launch in the aftermath of the unified request and some discussions we've been having to really try to broaden the community, not just for provider associations to sort of weigh in together and be in unison, but there are many, many other stakeholder groups, many people who support the IDA community system in Pennsylvania. And we really wanted to make sure that we were communicating with everyone. So we started that process. And part of that, if you can go to the next slide, Craig, we developed a campaign through Voter Voice. And this everyone should have received on our mailing list yesterday. So the announcement is on the left side that we sort of announced this campaign. We provided a link to the unified budget request letter. We're happy to drop that in if people are unfamiliar with it. You can find it on our website. And the editorial link is also in there as well in yesterday's announcement. So you can refer to this. This was really just where we were saying, this is really about you telling individual stories. Now that the provider associations representing many of the providers throughout and across Pennsylvania have gotten together, and we can have a conversation about what is the investment on a system level, what do we think will really help do things, such as increase wages by 20%. It's a 20% increase reflecting back on the calculation. So that should result in a 20% increase to average DSP wage, along with covering the costs increases associated with other things to run your programs. But at the end of the day, we really want to make sure that Governor Shapiro hears directly from you, the people in your programs, the families you support, your DSPs. Anything that affects their lives directly are really the most important stories that we can convey. So we encourage everybody to take advantage of the opportunity to write a letter, send a note to Governor Shapiro, distribute this to your own social networks, your own organizations. Feel free to use this campaign link to make it simple for yourself. Certainly, if you do other similar things, feel equally free to borrow our language or anything that we might be able to use to help you. We will have an advocacy toolkit that keeps pace with everything that we are doing in advocacy. So we just wanted to take the opportunity now. Greg, I don't know if you've dropped the link into the Action Center, but if you could do that, please. Yep, I see you have, so thank you. So you can take a moment right now. What we've done here in terms of the format, just to make it, a couple of things. So we want to make sure people tell their own story, and we've emphasized that in the communication of this. And we have put just a very brief general note so that just technically speaking, anything that gets sent is complete content. But if you write anything in the message body where it says, please add your own story, that will go first. Anything that you write individually will be the first thing that Governor Shapiro sees on this note when it's delivered to him. And then we have just a little bit of a closing that speaks in broader terms, just to make sure if somebody goes and just hits send and doesn't put anything in, that it will send a complete message from you individually to express your support for this campaign. So we encourage you to do either. We certainly urge you to send a personal message, because the provider associations and TPA, we can certainly address things at a high level. We certainly engage with individual stories and try to share them, but we don't want to presume to know anybody's truth or real experiences. We really think that should come from you, and we want to give you a platform to do that. So I think that takes us up to speed in terms of everything we've done through yesterday. With that, I would like to now introduce David Caligiuri from the Caligiuri Group. And David is joined the TPA team. He is now our engaged registered lobbyist and government affairs professional. So we're very happy to have David. I will also mention that we continue to work with Lou Bianchi and Scott Bishop from Police Associates due to the generosity of their engagement with Envision Human Services, other members such as Keystone Human Services. They have been actively involved. As Craig said earlier, the Government Advocacy Committee is open to everyone. We welcome and encourage your participation as members, any of your government affairs specialists in-house or that you might engage with. Please feel free to join us. Any Monday morning at 9:30, let us know. We'll add you the invite. We'll try to make it easy with the join now on the site. But we really encourage everybody's involvement on that. And with that, David, I will now really introduce you and welcome you to TPA officially.
Thanks, Patrick. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. As Patrick mentioned, my name is David Caligiuri with the Caligiuri Group, and we're here to assist Patrick and all of you in the advocacy efforts up in Harrisburg. I just want to emphasize how important it is for you folks to utilize voter voice and really not only get your story out, but just respond to the governor and to the elected officials and get engaged as much as you can, as much as you feel comfortable with. And if you have any questions or concerns, by all means, feel free to reach out to me. Patrick has my information. I'd love to hear from you if you have any questions or if you need any help or guidance whatsoever in connecting with our elected officials. This is a great tool to utilize. And, as Patrick mentioned, we do have our advocacy committee that meets 9:30 on Mondays. If you want to be a part of that, that'd be wonderful too. I'm sure we'll be taking some trips to Harrisburg in the coming months, and I look forward to working with all of you and hopefully meeting you in person. Thank you, Patrick.
Sure, David. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for being part of the team. And I also want to mention, you're also reaching out to the contract lobbyists representing the other associations at this point, correct?
That's exactly right. It's great to be a part of such a unified effort among all the advocacy lobbyists and organizations. I think doing this jointly, doing this together is really going to impress upon those elected officials the need for this. So it's really exciting, and I'll be working alongside all of the other lobbyists as well.
Yeah, we're happy to hear that. And we know you have some great relationships with some people who are current office holders, right? So you can certainly help us out with those relationships and, getting us and our members in front of the right people.
Yes, I guess I should have mentioned, I've been doing this for about 25 years and have been able to, work alongside a lot of our current elected officials. Some of them I interned together many years ago in different offices, so we have a great relationship.
Well, that's great, David. We look forward to working with you. We look forward also to your counsel and advice and helping us along the way here. So, we expect a lot to be happening. Budget address March the 7th, correct? So we're all working very diligently to see, what can happen, what can get into this upcoming budget, and we're very happy for the responsiveness so far of the governor and this administration. We've had a lot of representation from the IDA community, beginning back with the transition team. And we know a lot of members in the other associations have been able to have individual meetings with us. So if there's any questions for David, we're happy to entertain those. Welcome you all to raise your hand if you'd like to say anything. With that, as we kind of wait for any questions that may be for you, particularly David, I think we'll go ahead and move on. But thanks for joining us here today, David. Likewise, jump in with anything you want to ask of our members or anything you need from us.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate it.
So Craig, you can go on to, I know we're going to kind of go into the next part of our agenda. So I think this is pretty much exactly what we had put out that we wanted to talk to you a little bit about today. So we'll go through each of these items individually. So I think if you go next slide, Craig, the first thing that we really wanted to talk about a little here is the IDA waiver approvals. So Craig, please jump in with anything that you want to comment on. We have a couple of slides that I wanted to really call out the February the 9th webinar that ODP did that really kind of did a nice job reviewing everything in terms of the new waivers. It's real clear on items that are still outstanding. I think it does a nice job in terms of overview, in terms of the changes. And again, we've known what's in the waivers as applied to CMS for quite a while now. There was a delay, and as you may have heard even Kristen say last December, one of the hangups really had to do with teleservices. So teleservices is sort of this term that is now embedded in a lot of what ODP talks about. And you'll hear this if you listen to the webinar. The slides, I think Craig just posted the slide deck, so we want to share that with you as an attachment. You can walk through it. It's very instructive. It's not that that they're showing you what's written into the text of the waivers. It's high level. It gives some good explanation. Certainly you would want to listen if you can and have the hour to do so to the presentation of it. I think it's very informative and insightful. One of the big changes that we've been hearing about and starting to prepare for a long time is the new service definition that really splits out remote supports from assistive technology. So there is a fair amount of time discussing that, as well as the teleservices approach. So with that, there will be some forthcoming webinars as they develop some things that are remaining outstanding in terms of the new waivers. One of the things we'll emphasize, and I'll just have you jump to the next slide, Craig. Things here are kind of general. I do want to not forget to mention that any discussion of technology, there was really an accompanying discussion around making sure that privacy, choice, the right degree of protection of individuals' rights and safety is built into any plan, that if remote supports are used, that there needs to be a backup plan to make sure that if there does need to be direct intervention or staff in a place where remote supports has been deemed appropriate, that is an obligation of providers who use remote supports. But by and large, we don't see those as enormous obstacles. In fact, as you'll hear us talk about later, we really want to promote as much as possible the use of remote supports and assistive technology in IDA services. So, these are the teleservices that were sort of described on this webinar. And as you'll hear Julie say, teleservice is not really a service, it is a method of service delivery. So if you think about actively serving someone, COVID-19 has sort of spawned the ability for certain services to be delivered remotely rather than have somebody in person delivering those services. So these are all of the services that have some degree, at least, of the ability to provide that service through teleservices. So again, you can read the actual waivers. There's a lot of good resources and documents such as side-by-side comparisons on the DHS website. We will do our best to keep members informed and post information to our site as well. But I think this gives you a clear understanding. And there are other elements to the changes in the waivers that don't involve tech or teleservices. So you will want to listen for those too. A lot of things address increase of cap, increase of the amount for tuition and educational services, things that affect supports broker services, behavioral supports for residential providers. So there are some things that you want to be aware of. Again, these aren't brand new items. These are just really coming out now because of the final approval effective January 1st. So there's not new information or changes from what we have distributed to you before, what you've learned from ODP in the past. But everything is now in effect, and this is a nice tool for you to take a look at and listen to at your convenience to get caught up on any questions that you may have. Next slide, please, Craig, is really just some things that remain outstanding. Most notably, the ISP manual is not yet been updated. So you can look for the ISP manual that we described. Most notably, you will see then a separate service definition for remote supports. You can read all of this, probably in the side-by-side, certainly in the waivers that are posted on the site. So to get a true definition of remote supports and some of the responsibilities around that, that is already written into the waiver document. There will be forthcoming guidance on remote supports. There's been for a long time, a couple of years now, probably, guidance on the use of technology in homes and licensed facilities. So all of these things are in the process of being revised, and ODP has made a commitment to continue to hold additional webinars as these changes are made. So with that, I think unless there's questions, Craig, I'll turn it over to you to ask if you want to add anything on the waiver renewals, anything that you've heard directly or experienced directly.
I don't think there's much to really add. Again, this is sort of developing. Some of you may have seen that ODP put out an announcement this week that talked about some guidelines for remote supports. And so again, we will keep an eye on this and continue to monitor and share information with members as things continue to develop in this area.
Okay, thanks, Craig. And the next thing that we wanted to go into is the ending of the COVID-19 public health emergency. So again, there was a webinar by CMS that covered this. And this was largely a broad overview of the waivers and the impact of waivers for the various states from the CMS perspective. So this was a lot about guidance to states. Craig, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point, and we can go to the next slide. I have a couple of excerpts from the slide deck, and we'll drop that into the chat as well. So, you know, and actually this slide deck is kind of like verbatim. What they talked about is literally on every slide. So it's a long presentation. There's a lot of good information in here, but do recall that this doesn't apply solely to Pennsylvania. So, you know, there's a few things that we pulled out of this deck that we want to highlight. And maybe you just want to go through these, Craig, and then if you want to jump back to any of them, I'll ask you to make a comment. But quickly, I'll just let everybody see what we're going to be referring to. So the unwinding of the home and community-based services related flexibilities, you know, this is just generally speaking an unwinding of these requirements, because with CMS approval, and some of this relates to what you often hear the state and other states refer to as Appendix K revisions to their waivers, there was an accompanying bump in the federal matching percentage during this period of time. So this is why this is something that has been debated, whether the public health emergency should continue, because there are additional federal dollars going to all of the states to provide these additional flexibilities and in some cases services. So that's what you're seeing. The unwinding involves the state's accounting to now account for getting less federal money, and that is to be phased out over the period of 6 months. So if you go to the next slide, Craig, there's just a couple of details that I wanted to point out. So if you look at the termination dates, again, this applies to every state, every waiver. For Appendix K, in response to the COVID-19 public health emergency, the termination date will be no later than 6 months after the expiration date of the PHE. So you know, and if you have yet looked at ODP announcement 23-023, it spells out for you when all of these things terminate. So in some cases, they terminate on May 11th, the announced date for the official ending of the public health emergency. And in some cases, the expiration date of many of those items is November 11th, when certain items will sunset. And this is the requirement that isn't something that ODP decided that they could do or we're going to pick up on their own. It is part of the federal guidance that states have until 6 months after the ending of the public health emergency to unwind from some of those things that they've built in on a temporary basis. And the next slide really just kind of goes through what a lot of the states did. So you can see in terms of modified payment rates, modify provider qualifications, and you can go on down the line and you can kind of line these things up with some of the things that you've experienced as a Pennsylvania provider in terms of how that compares with how many other states did the same thing. And as you can see, many of the same things were done by other states. I think we know by now that the states, to some extent looked at what other states were doing. They certainly congregate as a group and talked about what things were going to benefit their programs the most. And there's a lot of commonality across all the states in the US. So I think from the deck that Craig has shared, those are the only slides we wanted to pull out and kind of call out to your attention because we thought they had implications in terms of services, rates, and particular deadline dates. So Craig, I'll turn it back to you for added comments you want to make on these slides.
So the only thing that I would add, I did participate in the conference, and at sort of towards the end of the webinar, they did talk about if we sort of go back to the term unwinding, they did draw attention that this is a process that is an assessment of trying to figure out what's working and what's not working and how they will sort of, it's not like a hard switch where they'll be turning things off. There are hard deadlines, but they are working with the states to sort of evaluate what should stay, how they can make adjustments moving forward. So I think it was an important call out just to make sure that we sort of emphasize, the term unwinding is a very intentional term of how this is gonna play out.
Craig, on that, if you just want to go to the unwinding of Appendix K and pick it up there, I know we have a couple of the points pulled from the attachments from that ODP announcement. Are you good to cover those, Craig? Or you want me to go through those?
Oh, sorry. Yes. So there are a couple of points that you can see in the announcement. They basically hit two deadlines. May 11, 2023 is where we'll see some of the changes to the way that you get consents for ISPs, the choices and rights that individuals might have in a residential or a life sharing home. And again, this is outlined in the in the announcement that came out earlier this week. The second big date is the November 11th date, and this is obviously there's a lot of details in the announcement, but everybody will draw their eye to that very, very last bullet, which indicates that the payment of the enhanced rates will end for CPS and transportation trip services on November 11th. So that obviously has created a lot of concern in our communities and in our with our providers. And I know that's something that Patrick will sort of talk a little bit about some of the implications for the CPS rate changes and what we're doing in terms of advocacy from that.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. And if you don't mind dropping in maybe the attachments, there's a separate attachment for the intellectual disability waivers and for the adult autism waiver. They're almost identical. However, they're different waivers. There's a few different changes in terms of that. But yeah, the first slide that Craig went over is literally, these are the things that end on May 11th on the day. So true to the sort of unwinding philosophy, other things happen over time. And I believe it's like on page 7 or 8, you hear that the rates are ending. And of course, what everyone is most concerned about rightfully is the fact that CPS rates, the temporary enhanced rates that everybody has been able to use since April of 2021, retroactive to January of that year, are now going to expire on November 11th. So that's not immediately, that's not May 11th, but that's in the foreseeable future, and that is in the upcoming fiscal year. So what we thought it would be a good idea perhaps to do would be to sort of go through this history briefly, provide some information about where things are currently based upon what the landscape looked like back when temporary rates were issued. So we don't have this bulletin prepared, I don't believe, to post to you, but you can look it up. So the PA bulletin from April 3rd, 2021 is really where the state announced the temporary fee schedule. So this was titled Temporary Fee Schedule Rates for Community Participation Supports Transportation Trip Services for the various waivers. And this was not a very long publication in the PA bulletin, but the highlights are these. There was a 30% rate increase for selected CPS services. And these are listed out very clearly in the bulletin. If you look at what the identified fiscal impact was when this was published, $16.337 million. And that was only for the fiscal year. So for the 2021 fiscal year, last 6 months, published in April, retroactive to January, 6 months of increased rates at the time was all probably anybody thought was going to occur. They were, of course, extended and remain extended now until November the 11th of this year. But you could see then in the succeeding years, which fiscal impact and the fiscal note always address this in any publication that affects dollars in the Pennsylvania budget. The succeeding years 1 through 5 were identified as zero increase, zero financial impact for the state. There's also a statement in this publication that says the department anticipates the decrease in utilized services resulting in a decrease of expenditures, which will offset any increase as a result of the temporary enhanced rates. So I recognize that many, if not all of you, experience this directly. So you cannot provide the same level of services, of course. So at the end of the day, you're not billing as much. You may not be spending as much, but you certainly are not able to provide the level of services. So it's even a bit contradictory. I don't know that you can completely square the fiscal impact calculation with the statement that we really expect utilization to be less. And if you recall the messaging at the time, ODP was kind of saying, we know we want these programs to remain in effect. There are closures. You could not even open and operate certain programs. So at that point in time, we believe that the understanding and the messaging was, we're going to bump these rates because we know you can't provide the services. So at the end of the day, this will hopefully keep you close to whole in terms of the amount of revenue you can generate from billing services at a reduced capacity. And if you take the 30%, and I'll have you go to the next slide, Craig. So indeed, it was 30%. So if you take a look, I'm hoping everything is on there, Craig. Formatting looks a little different. I'm sorry from I think how you're displaying, but I think everything is there. So you can see in the final column, 30% by each W code. So very specific, and again, the bulletin, this identifies the W code, the category, the staff to individual ratio in these rates, the temp rate, and what it didn't show was really what the current rate was. So back in 2021, we're referring to these here as the 2017 fees. It's really just the fee schedule rate that had been developed in 2017, 2018. So that's just a tag to say, basically, those are the old fee schedule rates. So 30%, you can see, pretty likely a target that an expectation that capacity may go down by 30%. So we'll increase the rates by 30%. And at least that's a big dent in the deep decrease in utilization that we know we expect because, first of all, programs are closing at this time. If you go on to the next slide, Craig, this will show you really the only change to this slide is to show you that what are the fees today. So when we say 2022 fees, these are the fee schedule rates that came out last January 1. So we've just done an update here to show you what are the temporary increases now, the difference between rates at today's numbers and temporary enhanced rates that have been in effect since January 1 of 2021, as announced on April 3rd, 2021. So the last thing that we really want to get into and talk to you about is just to show the fiscal impact, because, and this does tie, of course, to the impact it has on services for you, and to our advocacy. So if you take a look at what do these numbers look like today in terms of what's the differential and the temp increase? And I'm sorry, Craig, if I may need you to go one more. Okay. So I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. So we showed you 2017 fees, we showed you the 2022 fees, and if you kind of extend that out, the temp increase is now at the numbers that we just showed on the previous slide. And we have from Right to Know and a lot of other activities, we know how the state calculated the spending on CPS from units that Mercer Consulting compiled. And if you think about when the bulletin was issued, it was in 2021. They were using 1920, the only real full year they had. So we've used the same units to sort of take a look at what is the impact right now. So what would it mean if the state continued to maintain these fee schedule rates at the enhanced level? And you can kind of see for each one of these W codes what that dollar amount looks like. And you can see that it's $57 million, thereabouts. But if you really looked at what is capacity, we know that we're not at pre-pandemic capacity. And despite the 30% figure that was built in, there is a pretty strong acknowledgement and consensus, I believe, that capacity dipped as low as 40%. And I know that we hear from individual members, and also based on the ARPA initiative feedback, that it's really a struggle to get anything close to where we used to be. So even if you got back to 85%, or the system did as a whole, 85% utilization based on where it was, in other words, what they used when they set the rates, would still be the break-even point, where the state wouldn't spend any more money, even if we were all the way back to 85%. And I don't hear a lot of reporting that we're anywhere close to 85%. It certainly has not been borne out in any of the statistics and claims data that ODP has shared so far. So we just want to say a couple of things about this. We will continue to watch for what is occurring in terms of utilization and spending. We'll continue that dialogue with ODP. And we also want to remind everybody that if you think in terms of our advocacy initiatives, we're asking for 20%. And the 18% that you see there, really at about the middle column, 18% is really the aggregated amount. If you look at the spending and the units, how much on average are those rates going to drop? In reality, will drop on November 11th, 2023. It's about 18%. So we'll know in probably less than 2 weeks now in terms of what degree of success we will have in getting additional funding into the fee schedule rates. We will certainly use this argument based on whatever is in the budget to indicate how far off we are. But I do want to emphasize that the 18% is very consistent with what is already in the budgetary ask in the unified budget request, which is essentially a 20% increase. So we will continue to watch this. We may have a couple of things to say later when we go over some of the current initiatives in the ODP announcements, but wanted to call this out and just give everybody a brief history on the rates, where they came from, and give a sort of current look at current utilization. Again, we know you experienced that directly. So that kind of caps what we wanted to talk about on the rates. I think we've given all of the information in terms of what we've shared from everything that's happening with the unwinding, the effective dates. Again, there are many things that happen on November 11th, 2023. We've pulled this out. As Craig said, we know this is the headline grabber, but there are other things that you certainly want to make yourselves familiar with in terms of those attachments for the specifics. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of dialogue with other folks you work with on your individual teams as well to make sure that those things are addressed. So unless there's any other questions, we will move on to our next slide. And with that, it's an opportune time for me to introduce Ben Loudermilk, who is the new CEO for the Pennsylvania Assistive Technology Foundation. And I'm happy to introduce Ben, and I may have introduced him previously, or at least mentioned him. He is my newest co-chair on the ODP Technology Task Force for Strategic Partnerships and Funding. So I wanted to, we went over some of these things that are happening, we're kicking off our year, as one of our earlier slides indicated, on the schedule. On March the 9th, we're going to have our first meeting of the year. We've done some work to develop some things. So with saying no more, Ben, welcome, and thanks for joining us today. I'm glad you could be here.
Yes, thank you so much, Patrick, for the invitation. And I've sat in on the meeting. It's wonderful to get these updates. Thank you so much. And I may know some of you from my days at the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services. I was former Secretary Dallas's and Miller's executive housing director or special advisor on housing. And so we worked on developing a 5-year housing strategy. I hope somebody dusts it off in the Shapiro administration and looks at it, because I think we came up with a great framework. So housing's my history, 25 years in that arena. However, 5-6 months ago, I took the helm at the Pennsylvania Assistive Technology Foundation. And if you're not familiar, it's a statewide nonprofit organization. We help individuals with disabilities and older Pennsylvanians secure the assistive technology that they need and want in order to live fulfilling and wonderful lives. And we really focus on the information and assistance side of that so that people are knowledgeable about the assistive technology, smart home technology, financial education. We really focus on financial education, which I think is incredibly important so that people know how much money they have for housing, for assistive technology. We aid people in securing loans through our organization, up to $7,000 for a 0% interest loan for smart home technology. And then we can go as high as $60,000 for things like adapted vehicles, things that won't be covered under waiver or other insurance products. It's wonderful to be working in Pennsylvania in a different way. I've been most recently the executive director and vice president of housing for Inglis Housing Corporation. So I'm much more familiar with the long-term living side of government. But yesterday I was speaking to a colleague, Angela Fortney. I still have some connections and ties. Kristen and I are fairly close, and I know our CPA, especially Carol Ferenz, who I worked with years ago in Cumberland County. And Patrick, I'm very interested in joining. So I hope that I get to work with all of you in the future. And I'm still learning all of the ropes around what we provide. Patrick's been a tremendous resource, and I'm quite embarrassed that I don't know your organization as well as I should. It's really, it's been an interesting journey the last 5 to 6 months. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Ben. And apparently we should tell Lindsay Malden you said hello.
Yeah, absolutely. Lindsay and I worked at the Office of Social Programs. So while I was running the housing strategy, she was focused on other initiatives. She's a great person, outside of the box thinker. I don't think the Shapiro administration could have chose a finer individual. And if I can be helpful at all, let me know.
Yeah, appreciate that. I know we've had some members have met with Lindsay and we've heard great things about her. Her direct involvement and knowledge of intellectual disability system and direct experience through family members. So very in tune with everything. It seems like everything has been channeling through Lindsay in our world. And I also want to acknowledge with your housing background, that is something that the ISAC is forming a subcommittee on affordable housing. So Carol beat us to it, Carol Ferenz, who you mentioned, but we wanted to nominate you right away to be on that committee. I'll mention briefly that is sort of an offshoot of the IDA augmentation fund that we've talked about many times here. While we see that as potentially an offset, this is to keep state center dollars in the community system. ODP and the state sort of developed some marching orders through the budget, and affordable housing is one of the things that they can use those funds for. So we certainly don't dispute the need for that. We're happy to be nominating Ben. We know you have no problems being on that subcommittee, and we look forward to working with you there, as well as here with the Tech Task Force. So if there certainly are any questions, anybody wants to say hello to Ben, please raise your hand. Feel free to write us something in the Q&A. With that, Ben, maybe we can go into kind of where we are with our work group. And I'll mention, I think we have a great work group, and I want to emphasize these are proposed initiatives, and I also want to emphasize that this is an ODP Tech Task Force. So while we've tapped into the talent of a lot of our members, I'm very appreciative. Many of our members serve on the work group. So I know, just to mention a few, I know we have Barber National Institute. I know we have Amerikey, Encompass serves on the work group. Mainstay was Craig, active, really in helping organize the meetings and work with things. And Craig, feel free to jump in as well, people that I'm going to miss. But I know we also have Ken Preston in the work group. Spin is joining the work group. We have folks that are From ODP, Deloitte Consulting is active in helping work with us. So one of the things that we did, and I guess it's been kind of too long already, Ben, we've been working maybe a couple of months trying to set things up, get some proposed project plans to our members. And we kind of have, I don't know if it's a total accident, but we really are trying to force the issue around adoption. So we picked some numbers really without knowing where benchmarks are right now. So that's part of the equation that Ben and I can talk about or answer questions in a moment or two. But really, we're looking at increasing the adoption of remote supports and assistive technology by 15%. And the partners we have, this being a strategic partners and funding work group, we're working with Safe and Home in terms of remote supports. We've had other recommendations about expanding how we approach remote supports, but right now we really have a quality partner in a strategic way with Safe and Home. And likewise, with assistive technology, as I think most members know, we've been working with Dr. Dee Ding and the University of Pittsburgh, and they have a whole research laboratory institute, and they are very interested in working with us, conducting research, and finding out and helping us to promote which technologies will be the most preferred and used by people in the intellectual disability community. So we're really excited about both of those projects. I'll probably wait until we get to the next slide to kind of talk about recommendations to kind of fill some gaps. But right now, all of our work group members have the plans, and they're looking everything over. We want their input before March the 9th. And I guess the last one on this slide, Ben, I'll ask you to comment on, because most of what we accomplished last year was certainly through the increase in published resources by PATF. So
yeah, thank you very much. Just a quick plug, and you can't see it. I apologize. Funding or Assistive Technology is a guide that I cannot take credit for, but it is a tremendous guide. You can download it from our website, patf.us. And I'm not just putting in a plug because I love our website, but it is a guide that I go to day in and day out. It's our most popular guide, and it really digs into not only the assistive technology that you can secure, but how you can pay for it. So our goal is not to get everybody leveraged and have everybody collecting, on a loan, even though the loan terms are very favorable. It's to ensure that people are able to take advantage of all the different resources. We have about 70 different resources in that guide. So it's an incredibly important guide ranging across all the program offices with ideas on how all waivers interact with assistive technology and remote supports. So it's a very interesting way, but we really want to make sure that we have those resources. We just updated it in late 2022. So we update it fairly frequently. We're on the second edition already. So it's a fairly new guide, but take a look, download it, or you can give us a call and we will send you a copy.
Great, and we'll see if we can get it posted, and certainly if not, in the chat on the site. So thanks, Ben, for being with us today. Craig, if you want to go to the next slide, we will just briefly talk about the recommendations. So we have submitted these recommendations to ODP as we kind of closed out last year. So you can see the things that we have really asked ODP to consider: adopting the technology first policy, training on its proper application. ISP development comes up a lot in our work group discussions. Tracking remote supports, that really gets into our request of ODP to conduct a brief survey of residential rehabilitation and life sharing supported living organizations to give us a readout in terms of benchmarking against what's the baseline data on remote supports, because that's not in the claims. As you know, that even with the changes we talked about earlier, there really is no way that ODP picks up if you're using remote supports in the claims unless it's built specifically under that code. If it's built as part of one of those other codes, such as residential rehabilitation, they don't really know if you're using it or not because it is bundled into the rate. So we want to get some of that baseline data. We think we can use some of that for assistive technology. But we've learned that the lifetime cap is an issue sometimes when people even venturing into using any assistive technology. So these are all recommendations that we have made to ODP and the department to take a look at. We'll have more to report, and the work group begins looking at this in terms of action steps that we might take. Quick reference to number 5. I know that if you have listened or do listen in the future to the waiver amendments and updates, actually the new waivers that we were referring to earlier, that Julie and Sean posted and that we provided access to. They'll talk a little bit about the fact that internet is considered room and board. That's a fight we've been trying to maintain for a long time, to get internet and secure data funded in a different manner. And we know there's some other state requirements that sort of are mandating that, but for the time being, you'll hear Julie say this, I believe it's on the slides we shared, that internet is deemed to be on, according to CMS at this point, to be part of the room and board. So, we'll continue to work on these recommendations. And with that, if there's any questions on this, we're again grateful. Ben, you can join us. Happy to have you as a co-chair. And we welcome anybody in membership who's interested in becoming part of the ODP Technology Task Force, any work group, but we'd love to have you on our work group. So let us know if you're interested. Okay, Craig, do we have anything out there we need to address before we move on into next steps?
So I was notified during the course of the discussion that the chat feature was not working. I believe it is now fixed, and Will posted a chat that talks about what the issue with the SOC for for DSPs and how that is impacting rates. So I'd encourage everybody to just take a look at the chat, and it should be working now. So if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to use the chat.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Our apologies for that. So with this, I think that American Rescue Plan Act, not a lot to say. I'll quickly remark on the fact that I talked earlier about the CPS rates. Most of you are probably already aware that last month ODP announced a targeted initiative using ARPA funds to fund the recovery on a per person basis. If you are grow your program from pre-pandemic, there's an incentive per person for everybody in your program. If you recover 90% or greater, there's an incentive payment there, and 75 to 89%. There's similar incentives that apply to employment services and supports coordination. So Craig, if you're able to post that ODP announcement from January, it's really going to be based on what you do in this fiscal year, so through June 30th. And again, we understand and we've heard and we agree that simply creating incentives, particularly now that we know rates are going to literally decrease unless something is done about that, does not create an environment where we can bring people back. So we are continuing to have that conversation. That said, we just wanted to emphasize that it is money that is available. If you are experiencing difficulties in one CPS area, for instance, and you're able to provide different services, they will count everybody in your program as far as incentive payment. We're not trying to convince anyone that this is a solution to the broader problem, but we do want to make people aware, because all too often these initiatives are not fully spent by the department. In fact, this initiative comes from a surplus that was generated from the lack of spending the entire amount for recruitment and retention last year. So we knew for a long time that there was another 45 million available. We had been encouraging the department to put that money into rates. They've chosen to do another targeted initiative. So it's out there, and we do want to make sure people are aware of it, because there is the potential for you to get some increased funding. But again, we do not see it as a fix to the broader issues. So the next thing that I'll go to, and I now want to welcome in Brenda Bukowski from Allegheny County, who is the lead on the START project pilot in Allegheny County. And we reached out to Brenda to see if there was anything new to report. So rather than steal her headlines, I'm going to welcome you, Brenda, in, and you can tell us where everything is currently with the START program.
Thank you, Patrick. Good morning, everyone. I actually do have some important updates to share, and some things that I would ask the group to start thinking about for the months ahead. So our provider partner, RHD, is actively hiring the clinical team that will be providing the active treatment in the community. The interesting thing here is, as that team gets up and running, they will be assigned a caseload. There is an extensive certification and training process that goes into that. So we're going to have some overlapping activities. The entire team does not need to be hired for certification and training to begin. So as the coaches and the coordinators in particular get hired, we will be starting the intake referral process. So to that end, in the next few weeks, maybe a month, we will be distributing a trifold information and an information pamphlet that will include the referral process. And just as a reminder, all referrals for the treatment team will come through the county. Benita Cabal, our START program director, will be the one reviewing those. They'll go to a committee for further review and then approval. We do have an official launch date for the START project, and that will be July 18th. That's going to be an in-person event. We don't know where yet. So again, just the date is what we have nailed down. And so that'll be a real nice opportunity for all of you and other stakeholders to come meet the team, meet the key people at RHD, our office, as well as the University of New Hampshire. I think things will really start taking more of a concrete shape leading up to that time. And then that is our official kickoff. We're also currently developing an advisory board. It's going to start off relatively small at first, but we do hope to grow it to be a pretty significant size. We really want representation across systems and across types of service and support. So really having a diverse group to help us determine if what we're doing makes sense will be real important to us in the months ahead. I do want to mention that initially we're going to be using the IM4Q process as a way to gauge individual satisfaction and programmatic satisfaction or challenges. I'm putting it out as short-term, perhaps gauge. It may or may not be our long-term satisfaction survey. We really need to see if it produces what we want it to. The nuance here being our current IM4Q looks at individual satisfaction, of course, and provider satisfaction and challenges, but we really want to be able to gauge that treatment piece. And so how we do that without being too confusing with the current IM4Q process is one of the things we're going to be measuring. And then challenges that we currently have that we'll be reaching out to all of you for thoughts and suggestions is, how do we represent the START treatment plan in the ISP and in the behavioral health treatment plans? Having 3 plans seems cumbersome, even more cumbersome than having 2 separate plans across systems. So this will be a huge challenge for us to try to figure out what's important in those plans and how does it get represented. And to that extent, we will also be engaging our supports coordination organizations in terms of what, and more particularly who, will they be monitoring when they go out. Again, the treatment team is interesting in my mind in that they are not, they are a service, but they are not a permanent part of the individual's life. So how do we monitor their effectiveness? And so those are just some nuances that we'll need to be training on and talking about and making sure those expectations are just clear. And I think to all of that, I just want to remind folks, because we've had to remind each other in-house, this is a pilot of how the system responds to need. So it is important that we keep that in the forefront because it will not necessarily be targeted on provider performance or individual performance. So with that, that's pretty much all the updates we have for now. Are there any immediate questions or concerns anyone has?
Thanks, Brenda. While we wait for those to come in, I just had a question about, do you see a direct relationship between start in pilot phase, the treatment team that RHD is now developing around maybe some of what you see at the county level in terms of placements that are in a sort of a troubled state right now. I mean, we get reports here, of course, people can't be served in their current environment. So do you see this able to close that gap in any kind of an effective way soon, or is that maybe some of the profiling you're looking at to how could we support the situation better to start?
Yeah, it's certainly my expectation that this addresses that. What we're finding in looking at those situations, folks who are really experiencing rapid rehousing and situations like that are not, they are most complex people, but not necessarily those with intellectual disability. They do represent a large part of our autism population. And they are not people who always have to have a high need score. So how this treatment team can address that by supporting provider staff, by introducing us to new resources, that's the kind of stuff I'm excited to see what kind of impact this treatment team could have. So yeah, long answer to your question is yes, I would look for the development of this treatment team to be able to impact some of those cases where folks we just are missing the mark and being able to support them well.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And something you also just mentioned, I'm just beginning to learn about some of the issues around CIS scores and maybe, what is certainly perceived as a disparity between the score and the level of resource needs that people have. So I don't know if there's anything that you can comment on. I know we intend to sort of take a very quick look at that and get up to speed with some of the real implications, but I'm hearing that quite a bit here. I don't know if you are as well, or if you can comment on that.
Yeah, we've played a lot with, in the very beginning, and they really do hold true. We earmarked about 70 to 75 individuals who we thought, anecdotally, this was way before our planning, would be good referrals to us, the START treatment team. And we ran data on them. And what we are finding is it's almost a 50-50, no, I'll say a third, and a third. 1/3 did not have a CIS score at all. Another third had a CIS score of a 4 or a 5. But the other third had scores of 1. So I think it does speak to, yeah, those scores can help indicate a number of things, but I think when we delved into those ones even further, they're those folks that really have significant behavioral health challenges, a lot of ability, but significant enough behavioral health challenges that it affects their ability to be successful in the community.
Yeah, and before START ever can intervene, we know it's not in a position to do so now. I think concern over the responsiveness of the CIS score change is something that also learning about. So I think we'll definitely make that a part of something we pay some closer attention to and part of our advocacy. But I don't know if you can share anything there as well, but from what I'm hearing, it would be much better if we could make those adjustments for those people. I understand the process to get the CIS score, there's an assessment and so forth. But where it's a mismatch, where anybody would look at it and say that's just not sufficient, to bridge to where there can be something like a START treatment team, a different model, and something that's more sustainable for those folks who need it. But yeah, thanks for providing all that today. And if there are questions, Brenda, if you have anything more you want to add, Brenda, anything I said, please, I don't want to cut you off.
Oh, no. Nope, that was everything. Thank you, as
yeah,
always.
Thanks for joining us today. And I really appreciate your time. We'll keep in touch. Anything we can do through TPA to help, connect anything or answer questions, provide input from our members who have a real keen interest in doing this, or some folks they really think would benefit from being part of the study, part of the pilot, benefit from the treatment team, let us know. And I'm just going to briefly segue into the health risk screening tool. I know we have some members who sit on the work group on this. We reached out to Dr. Chirpus, and he let us know that the HRST Lifetime Medical History Work Group is actually what it's called. We'll be meeting again soon. Intellectability has been engaged to produce some changes. At that point, we understand ODP will be prepared to share that model with the provider associations for some feedback. So we'll look forward to doing that as well. Craig mentioned our conference in the summer. Since we weren't able to engage with Dr. Chirpus to attend one of our upcoming meetings, we certainly want and hope to have him in July in person, as he was able to come last year. Maybe there'll be a little bit more to report on this, but in the meantime, we know we have active members, Bill Shoppy from PATH, Brooke from McGuire Memorial, Brooke Graff, and Craig Douglas from Mainstay Life Services. So anything we need to get to the committee, to Dr. Chirpus, to ADP, any experiences you have with HRST, please continue to share them with us. And briefly, I want to circle back. Karen Jacobson, I think that you're okay with your mic situation now. If you are available to join us for a second to make comments, if you were not able to do so earlier, please let me know if you're free to do so now. And Craig, is there anything we need to do to open mic at our end? I see Karen's hands back up, and I think she indicated she wanted to say a couple of words.
Karen, I think you should be okay to talk.
Karen, apologies for the difficulties we're having apparently to allow you to speak here at the meeting, and hope others are not having that as well. We appreciate your interest in doing so. If we can get that corrected before the end of the meeting, we certainly would love to hear from you. With that, in the meantime, I'll move on to the state center closures. We're aware that Whitehaven has officially closed. As of today, officially is the date of closure for Whitehaven. And most of the people from Whitehaven, I believe and understand, have actually been moved to another state center. So there's not a lot of community placements that occur with the Whitehaven transition. Polk actually is slated to close March 31st of this year. So these closures of these state centers are indeed happening. So this is monumental and historic in many cases. I mean, these institutions have been there for many, many decades. People who live there, we understand. And for the people who have supported them, this can be a very emotional time of change. But we did want to acknowledge this. And at the most recent Isaac meeting, Kristen Ahrens did identify a plan with the Verland Foundation, with Verland, to participate, that they have been working with ODP for quite a while here in terms of a plan to close Polk State Center. And Verland is involved in that planning. And we asked Bill Harriger to come in today and join us to describe a little bit about that. So I will say, Bill, first of all, thank you and welcome. Appreciate you being here. When Kristen talked to the Isaac membership last week, she really expressed a lot of enthusiasm for the partnership and the plan and the transition for these people who will ultimately leave Polk and go into the community. But I thought nobody better than you to kind of explain what's happening and give you the chance to talk about it and maybe answer a few questions.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Patrick. I think it was back in August or September of 2019 when the state formally announced the closures of 2 of the then existing 4 state centers. So Polk and Whitehaven were scheduled to close in a 3-year period. Of course, COVID got in the way of a lot of that planning. The 2 remaining state centers are Evansburg and Selinsgrove, which most of you know. My concern when they first announced this was that the plan was to transition the folks who were at Polk and Whitehaven out to private providers such as Verland and most of the folks that are on this call, on this Zoom meeting. And again, my concern was in two main issues. One is the DSP staffing crisis. I told Kristen, I said, if you found 30 or 40 people at Polk that just fell in love with Verland and would love to move to Allegheny County and be served by Verland closer to where a lot of the parents and families reside, that we wouldn't be able to serve them because we have no staff. And then the other issue, of course, is housing. So those are 2 major drawbacks that we had to struggle with. The one thing that we talked to the state about is, are there places in and around Polk that would be able to accommodate the individuals as they transition out of Polk State Center? And there really weren't a whole lot of opportunities there. So Verland filed an RCAP grant, RACP grant request. It's Redevelopment Assistance Capital Program. Some of you in the past may have received funding through this grant. It's been around for quite some time. It used to be called walking around money, from what I'm told. But I do know that Marikey has received some funding in the past. I think Keystone Human Services has. I know Erie Homes has, and I believe Envision has received some RCAP funding in the past. So Verland filed 2 RCAP grant requests, and we were awarded both. We were basically given notice in November that we received $500,000 to help with the construction of a home in Allegheny County. And our $4 million project in Venango County was approved. RCAP usually funds half of your requested project costs. So we received a $2 million RCAP grant to help with the construction of up to 4 homes to be built in Venango County. Our whole plan is to, and then of course we worked with ODP to increase the waiver requirement from no more than 4 per home. We've increased that to 8, and they agreed to do that. So we are looking to construct 4 8-person homes in Venango County to serve as many as 32 residents out of Polk. And we've identified those residents, and we are now looking to close on several lots to begin construction. In the meantime, as Patrick had mentioned, we're working with the state on formally closing Polk Center. So while we construct these homes, we're actually going to rent one of the buildings in at Polk Center and Meadowside, if any of you are familiar with the Polk campus, where these 32 residents will then move into the Meadowside building. Verland will become the provider. It will be licensed as an ICF until the individuals move to these 4 new homes that are going to be constructed. We think it'll take probably a year and a half before all that happens, before they're able to move into the new homes. But so if it happens to be March 1st or March 31st, we are currently looking at a lease agreement for Verland to lease that space on that campus from the state. And once that gets all ironed out between the attorneys, the transition will take place. So it could be the case where Polk State Center staff punch out on March 31st as state employees, and then they punch in on April 1st as Verland employees. We were fortunate enough to hire, I think, 124 of the current Polk Center staff to join Verland when this transition takes place. And if you think about it, at the Polk Center, I mean, they had basically every type of position that we would need from a residential perspective, from the DSPs to middle managers to program specialists to back-end folks. They had people in dietary departments working there, maintenance. And so we've basically have hired enough staff from each of those job descriptions where we're able to basically maintain services as a continuum of care until the homes are built. And then the staff will transition, or the homes will transition from being served in an ICF at Polk Center campus to the Verland CLA homes, probably about a year and a half from now. As an ICF, we were able to offer their continued salaries, which was a key to hiring that many staff members. Again, 124 are joining us, and they're not taking a 30% haircut, because on an earlier slide that Patrick put up, you can see that our DSP wages are probably 30% lower than what the state is able to pay. So once we transition to the CLA home, we have an agreement that we will work through the appeal process to make sure that we receive adequate funding moving forward to maintain those homes up there. We also had an initiative where we had an old ICF that transitioned to a waiver funded home in the late 90s. And the state agreed to allow us to transition that CLA group home back to an ICF. And we've also taken as many as 8 individuals out of Polk to be served at that home. The reason why we wanted it to be an ICF is because, again, we're able to staff it appropriately with a nurse 24/7. So we can provide a little higher level of care for some of the more medically needy, fragile individuals transitioning from Polk to Verland. And right now, I believe we have 5 individuals with another 1 or 2 that are going to transition to Verland from Polk State Center by the end of March. So that's basically the plan. At the end of the day, I think Verland will be helping to place as many as 40 individuals from Polk State Center as it closes. The vast majority of the individuals, as Patrick has said, from Polk and Whitehaven, unfortunately, have transitioned from Polk and Whitehaven to Evansburg and to Selinsgrove. But we think the RCAP model is a nice way to go to get some funding. I know Ben, I think I've had conversations with Ben in the past about housing. And so I think I think hopefully he'll be a good resource, but I would encourage people who are interested in perhaps even divesting of your 2-story homes as your individuals age and they're not able to do the steps and you need to replace that housing stock with ranch style homes, fill out an RCAP grant and maybe you can get the lion's share of those homes taken care of through some funding. There are some strings attached. You do have to pay prevailing wage, and there's tons of paperwork that's involved with it, but it's well worth it. I'd be happy to answer any questions that folks might have.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And David, who was with us earlier, who had to leave a little bit ago, had mentioned similar things that to the money that you were able to obtain. You know, a lot of this project money, he's connected with some of those resources. So glad for you to bring that up, Bill. As we wait for any questions here, I want to just acknowledge that I know that Karen wasn't able to jump on, but she did write in the faces and memories of the people we support will help to keep us focused on the importance of all of our advocacy efforts. If you're joining us late, we showed the photo from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette editorial with Matt Mittelmeyer, who was served by Emmaus of Pittsburgh and Karen's organization. So I'm glad you were able to add your thoughts to that, Karen. Again, very kind words, very glad that Matt can continue to carry on the legacy and we can all rally around that. So I think we do have a question from Steve. Why more than 4 per home?
Basically, we looked at it from an efficiency perspective. If you have a 4-person home, you still have to have living space and garage and vehicles and kitchens and things like that, that as you construct a home for 8 individuals, certainly the cost is higher from a housing perspective, but it's not quite twice what 4-person homes would be. And also when you have homes a size greater than 4, it also helps with staffing issues. Where you know, you might need 3 or 4 staff in the home to take care of 8, where you might need 2 or 3 staff to take care of 4, depending upon the unique needs of those individuals. So that's how we
I see to that question. You know, we mentioned earlier financial management work group. We're going to try to kick off on the 23rd of March. And just knowing we're short on time, I was already going to say, Bill, maybe we can bring you there if you or one of your staff to talk about this a little bit more about the whole process. Interesting model. Certainly, there's a lot of questions about how to do it, and some of the questions in terms of the future of it, funding, wage, in terms of the number of people living together, the decisions on choice. Obviously, different when people are moving from state centers than it would be under ordinary circumstances. And sound like you clearly had some waivers on some issues, but we'll plan to put that on the list of discussion items for our financial management work group committee meeting that we're scheduled next month. And with that, Craig, if you want to advance, I know we only have a moment or 2 here, so we'll try to be very brief with the final updates. And Bill, thank you for joining us. Any questions we get, certainly we'll forward them on to you, and we'll invite you, if you can, to come and join us at the Financial Management Committee meeting next month. So, Craig, do you want to go ahead and cover a couple of things here briefly?
Yep, in just a few seconds, just to let everybody know, we continue to work on the TPA website. Our intent of that site is really to make it more of an engagement tool rather than just a single library where everything is housed. So we'll be looking at some new features around creating a forum, ways for people to chat and communicate on questions. This will be a great opportunity to learn more about the RCAP funding and the opportunities that are available around that. So more developments on that to come in the future as we sort of flesh out the details of the site.
Thanks, Craig. If you want to go to the next slide, I'll just briefly talk about something that we've made mention of in terms of our talks with the Center for Healthcare Solutions. This is kind of a running list we've been talking about with TPA members individually, sometimes at meetings with our board when we talked about the direction of the strategic affiliation. And these are just some of the things that we hope to immediately deliver in terms of working with Center for Healthcare Solutions on things they have already. You've already seen that with the data analytics, with the wage study we've done. Lobbying service is something we continue to talk about. The group purchasing is something we have not delivered through TPA directly. We're working currently to get a platform that will be ready to go July 1. And these are some other things, including the annual conference that we mentioned earlier. So next slide, Craig. Real briefly, I'll also get into the agenda items we talked about in terms of the rate appeals. So there are 75 rate appeals that were filed. We also are aware of the RCPA litigation. I think it's been referred to as that, initiated by RCPA on behalf of many individuals, families, provider organizations, and RCPA, largely around CPS. I'd like to say that there is continued communication and collaboration among the attorneys representing associations, attorneys representing TPA and other members. And I think this collaboration has been really effective in terms of working together, sharing information, and also its relationship to advocacy. So at the end of the day, there's many of the same issues: inflation, the redetermination of fee schedule rates is kind of critical to all of these efforts, including the litigation and rate appeals. And of course, it's part of our advocacy to invest in fee schedule rates. So next slide, Craig, is really just, I've called out the fact sheet because it's really a nice document that we developed last year that we really see as an effective tool this year in kind of explaining in sort of a top 10 list way. These are the things that we identified at the end of last year. We got some positive feedback on this, so we updated it to include the annual inflation statistic, a couple other changes to make sure that it was current and up to date. But this is posted on our site and something else that you can refer to. You meet with the legislator. Sometimes legislators want to know exactly how are the rates created in Pennsylvania and developed, and what are some of your concerns. And this gives you a real simple way to share this information. You can feel free to just hand it out, refer to it, but we do think it's a nice tool that we wanted to call out. So next slide, Craig, please. With that, we thank you for being here today. We're sorry to keep you over a couple of minutes. If there's any closing things we need to cover, Craig, from chat or Q&A, please let me know. If we miss you here, we will follow up with you directly. With that, I will thank everyone again and sign off. Anything more from you, Craig, on our behalf?
Nope, I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your day and weekend. We'll talk to you soon.